Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is just a Coleman with a torque converter. Today, we're going to stick a bunch of GX 160 parts in a GX 200. It's actually a 196, a Hyson 196. It has the 16mm output shaft and everything. We're going to be using a torque converter and an adapter from Grey Goat Garage. This is a 54mm stroke crank. Typically a GX 160 is 45mm. So we're sort of building a stroked GX 160, I guess. GX 160 likes a little more RPM. This is the Hyson 196 cam, so that's GX 200 profile. The exhaust, yeah, it's whatever, but look at the intake. Okay, you see the duration? This is our GX 160 cam. There's the exhaust. We'll say that's comparable, but get you some of that intake. We have the same lift, but we don't have all the duration. These puppies like to spin. This one is a GX 160 clone cam. This is the one we're using. The only reason is because the Honda cam that I have has a little more wear and tear on it, and it would also need clearancing right around those identification marks. I already tried it. When it spins around, the piston comes up. It hits right about there. So, we're going to have the GX 160 rod, piston, and cam. Get those two right out of here. We're also going to use a GX 160 head. Well, it's not genuine. It is a 14cc small valve, which the older GX 160s are famous for. Here is the 196 head. So this is GX 200. I want to say it's 18 to 20 cc's. It's got the same valves though. We're going to nab those and maybe the rockers, definitely the slip retainers. Other than that, we're going to keep the governor and try a different linkage this time. That's right. Felicia's paid up on her rent, so we're going to let her hang out. This is new to me, so we'll see how that goes when we get there. In the meantime, let's do stuff I know, like prepping the block. I used a long 1/4-inch drill bit to reach down inside and bore out the galley hole. I then cleaned up the edges with a round file. Nothing serious. I just don't want any of these aluminum flakes to be clinging on. That'll come off. We're going to give this a thorough cleaning before we start to assemble it anyway. Next, I'm going to drill a hole in the side cover right about here, and I'm going to tap it out for a barb. That is going to be for our block vent. It only took me a handful of drill bits to step up enough to get my 1/8 inch MPT in there. It's all threaded out. I tried to play it safe. When you thread it in, you're using that, nut section, and it does run out of clearance up against this portion back here. This is going to be, the face of your gasket. There's going to be some pressure there from these two bolts. We're going to be hanging a torque converter. You're just trying not to make a weak spot, but at the same time, we're trying not to constantly blow out side cover gaskets. This should thread in pretty easily. You don't really want to fight it. Alright, it starts to get tough right about there. I'm going to clean this thing up, and I'm going to be using some JB Weld epoxy type stuff around the edges of this. Looking at this situation from the bottom, or the inside, however you want to look at it. If I did this again, I would make a mark on the center of this face where I want the barb to come through, and then I would drill down at an angle this way towards that center. That would get me away from this ridge out here. I don't even know if that's going to be a problem. We're fixing to find out. I'm going to clean it up, do the epoxy thing, and send it anyway. I have other side covers. I could do one ahead of time, just in case. But I think that'll work. I think I cut off too much of the JB water weld. I definitely don't think it needed that much. But hey, waste not, want not. This might have some sort of bonding and structural properties to it when it cures. I'm not looking to get the barb off anyway. I just want that thing to stay in place. I just lubed up the cylinder and the bearing in my nice clean block. Now, I'll clean my shaft, lube it up, and get it where it needs to be. I have my Honda flat top piston and rings installed on the rod. I'm using the 196 rod and wrist pin. I just added some new clips. I'm going to lower that down into the cylinder and get the rod onto the crank. I brought my rod down, I reinstalled my cap, and I set both of these 10mm bolts at 108 inch-pounds. I suppose this is another difference. The GX160 has shorter lifters and a shorter cylinder. Because we're using a 196, we're going to use the 196 lifters. I just cleaned off my GX160 clone cam. I have my push rods here. We don't need those right now, but they are accounted for. I'll lube up my lifters and get those in, and then I'll line up the timing dot on the cam with the dot that is somewhere right there on the crank. Drop it right in. I just busted out my trusty camshaft installation tool and threw my PVL flywheel onto the other end. Now we can spin things around and make sure that we're not making contact. We're good. Real good. This thing's smooth. It's like new, so that's what's up. I'm about to do the lightest port job I've ever done on this 14cc head. This is very much a stock-like build, so we don't want to do too much. Flip it over. Okay, our intake's on the left, our exhaust is on the right. I'm going to go in right through the bowl, and I'll be attacking the short radiuses. Alright, so right there and over here on the exhaust side. After that, I'm going to rough up my intake runner a little bit, and I don't know, I might work these transitions back just a little bit where the bowl and the runner meet. If I do, it's going to be extremely light. Now, one little micro burr. That's all I used. Put the other two away. Take a look. There's the transition from the bowl to the runner. Short radius. And the other transition. That's the exhaust side. I also barely took the edge off the runner where it meets the valve guide. On the intake side, I did the transition, short radius. The other transition, I roughed up the bowl a little bit. Grabbed that little bit in front of the valve guide. And then I roughed up the runner real light. That's just gonna agitate things as they go in there. That way they don't get too comfortable and they mix around well. For what it's worth, I just broke down the stock 196 head. Well, I guess I could tell you what it's worth. Probably 20, 25 bucks. If you didn't have one kicking around, you had to source the parts that we're after, that's probably about what it would run you up. We're going to use the entire valve train, I guess you want to call it. We're going to use the rockers and the valves all the hardware that go with them, everything except for the stock springs. I took my 196 valves and I just lapped them into the 14cc head. I'm now going to clean this thoroughly. You got to clean in between everything. So like when you do the ports, you got to clean it after because you can't have any metal shavings down inside the guides when you lap the valves. Get used to it. Where we're still on a governor, we're only going to run 18-pound springs in this build. Even though these Honda 18s are a little bit longer, they're not that difficult to set with the slip retainers. I already have the intake done, the seals on there and everything. I'm feeling pretty positive about my valve lapping job. Everything here is basically brand new. It shouldn't leak, and it's not, so that's always a good thing. You guys ready for a little budget upgrade? I know I am. We're going to go ahead and swap out these stock rockers for some Champion shaft-mounted style rockers. These are going to give us some improved stabilization where we're going up in spring pressure, we're adding compression, the RPM, even with the governor, it's probably going to go up with it. So it would be nice to have a little something extra in our corner, helping us fight the good fight here. I like to install my Champion rockers after my push rods are in place. The only way we're going to drop those bad boys in is if we install the head. I'm going to be using the Mondo head studs. These are just finger tight, but they are threaded in all the way. I'll slide my 10 thousandths head gasket down. Nice and square. Make sure I'm over my dowels. And now I can place the head. The Mondo nuts get torqued to 20 foot-pounds. Now I can drop my push rods down onto my lifters. I loosen both of my adjusters, and then as I'm bringing the towers down onto the studs, I get the push rod underneath the rocker arm. Once I'm there, I get the nut on. These two nuts are just finger tight. Now I'm bringing my adjusters in. I'm leaving them super loose, but not loose enough that the push rods can fall out. The nuts on the Champion rockers are set to 94 inch-pounds, so that's just the little guy. Well, that was a filthy mess. I think it was worth it though. I'll let the results speak for themselves. Definitely a lot better than it was. I'm gonna get this cleaned up. I'm checking my timing dots one more time. I have a fresh side cover gasket. Both of my dowels are in place. And I'm adding one shim. I'm going to tip this up on its side and lubricate everything that I can, including the bearing in the side cover itself. I'm putting a couple drops of red Loctite on my side cover bolts before I start threading them in. These bolts are torqued to 18 foot-pounds. So just a little bit less than those studs. I don't want to go any further. The factory spec is 17. I'm at 18. If I got to tighten something on the fly, that might leave me a pound or two to work with later down the road. Plus, I don't want to strip out the threads in my block. We have to lap this PVL flywheel on to make it official like a whistle with this engine. I have my crank holder tool. This is for a 3/4 bore though. You put it over the 16mm shaft, it just falls limp. I cut off a piece of, it was either 16mm or 5/8 to 3/4 sleeve adapter. This would be for like a clutch. I'm going to put that over the shaft and slide it on. Line up the keyways, and then we'll grab the crank holder tool, slide that over the adapter. I'm going to try to line up both of these keyways. It's going to be pretty hard. Here, let me see. The adapter came with one of these deeper keys. That way it nabs both keyways. See if I can get it here. Oh yeah. Yep, come on. All right. It's a lot easier with two hands, obviously. So I have to line up with a hole, which I think we're there. And oh, we're so close. I'll just thread my bolt in. Sausage fingers, don't fail me now. All right. That secures the shaft. A hammer and a flat screwdriver are used to knock the woodruff key out. You just hit it inward. See that rounded taper? As it catches that, it pushes itself out. Today's fragrance, the essence of fine metal grinding compound. It doesn't take much. You have to clean this up after, including the flywheel. This is a used flywheel, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to lap it on to the crank, especially where it's not exactly brand new. It already had a flywheel on it, but you know, it didn't have this one on it. So I'll do a pretty thorough job here and then clean her up real good. That'll do. Do what you gotta do to clean up the heavy. Then go after it, some carbon choke cleaner. You can't have any of this residue near your bearing seal. You'll wear that up real quick, you get in there. Used my hammer and I just bumped the flywheel key back in. It's really called a woodruff key, but some people don't know that. I'll give you a second to figure that out. It's 54 foot-pounds. for the torque on the flywheel nut when you're using the PVL. I'll spin this around, and now I can remove my crank holder tool. I just made sure I was at top dead center, and then I set my valve lash at 0.0015. I like to run it nice and tight. I'm going to use one of my modified coils. So we have the XL wire with the non-resistor boot, PVL flywheel. We gap that coil at 1 business card. I'll leave some links in the description with some of the parts that I'm using today. It's sort of a mix match. Right now we're about to get into the Stage 2 torque converter kit for these Coleman mini bikes. It comes with a non-EPA carb, number 37 jet, your billet intake adapter, filter, I already oiled this one, auto light, spark plug, all of your gaskets, and then a bunch of goodies for the torque converter itself, and a riser plate, as well as a header. The gifts just keep on coming. I'll start by opening this carb up, getting my jet in, and then I'll get that installed over here on the intake. I gotta tighten those studs up too. Since I'm keeping the governor, I'm gonna have to keep this stock linkage too. I'm just trimming it back where it's a little excessive. I think this had something to do with the factory airbox. Maybe not. Either way, it was just kind of hanging out here. I might have to do a longer spark plug wire because of the rod and governor spring that cross over there. Oh, they welded the screw for the factory limiter. I don't know why I can't get that in focus, but I'm going to go ahead and cut that off as well. Definitely freed up some real estate here. I'm going to get my sheet metal on and then take a look at that linkage. That thing is going to go out here. It's going to have a rod going in. I think I'm going to have to take that cable stop off as well. Here's the linkage after I trimmed it. Let's just say I trimmed a little bit too much. So that's going to put the kibosh on that. I just started with a new one. I'd cut that limiter off on the other one, and then I didn't have a place for the return spring. We need that as a backup to anything else that's going on. That way, if the rod from this wicked awesome linkage I'm about to show you were to slide out of the stop over here, then the throttle would return back, to the off position. That way you don't go full hornet release. This thing is really hard to see where it's all black on black. Let me tell you, the absolute easiest way to hook up a throttle to a governed linkage. We're talking minutes here. If this was a brand new engine, we would take the airbox off. You would take off that little cable stop piece Get that out of there. You know, the cable goes with it. Replace that with that rod. And then this bolts right to the same threaded sections. You know, I don't know if you call them inserts. The threaded portions of the fan shroud that the starter attaches to. Yeah, that's where those go. So it holds the starter and everything. The cable is going to come through here, and I'll run it down to this clevis. When we get there, you still have a couple more things to do. I ran that wire out. I did install the gas tank, and I left my Tygon fuel line chilling out there too. So we're going to get that tightened up. Get the billet adapter, air filter. Oh yeah. Ventilation system. We have a block vent that's going to go up to this head somehow, and then from the head somewhere else. Should probably figure that out now. I just lubed up my rockers, and I'm now going to be installing a valve cover extension. That's going to include the valve cover at the same time. I put my bolts right through it like a shish kebab, line it up with the holes, and then just start tightening. It's the easiest way. We're going to use this as our PCV. Alright, we're still on a governor. It's still very much a stock engine. So I think the stock ventilation system will be plenty. We are relieving the block and redistributing to the head. So that's going to help us no matter what. This should be pretty cool. This is for those of you that didn't quite grasp that concept. It's kind of like a valve cover club sandwich. And you got to hit it with your toothpicks, right? In your corners. Well, not directly in your corners because you still get a slice across, and you don't want too much bacon in any particular. But what? I'm getting hungry. All right, I'm going to line these up with those 4 threaded holes, and that'll be its resting place. That's why I oil the valves first. Good thing I have a hint of semi-professionalism about me. I didn't tighten this all the way yet. I still have to hook up the vent system. We have a barb over here on our modified side cover. I put a piece of 1/4 inch yellow Tygon on it. It's good and long. I have a straight barb. We're using this valve cover extension for 2 things. To clear the Champion rockers and for this bad boy. I'm going to thread this in, but I'm not going to go all the way. And that's because we're dealing with 2 soft metals, and chances are one might pigtail or flake as I tighten because it's tapered, alright? I know that this is going to work. It's going to look the balls. So I'm now going to remove my valve cover extension club sandwich. I'm going to thread that all the way in. Make sure it's nice and clean. And then I'll get it back on. Yeah, buddy. I told you that would look good. I had a couple clamperinos on there. I finished off my spark plug wire. Leave a nice loop on it. not interfering with any of our linkage. We're going to run something of a hose, sort of a, just like a vent line with some sort of a filter on it. I have the air filter that's going to go on. What was I going to do next? Oh yeah, engine oil. Before I forget it, I just measured out about 16 ounces in an empty container and then added a cap full of zinc additive. I hit my header with heat paint and then I wrapped it before I installed it. Fresh air filter, ready for a cover. Now I'm going to mount the engine on this riser plate that I painted blue. Don't worry, it'll sort of match. I have all 4 of my bolts threaded in, but they are not tight. This engine has a little bit of pivot on top of our riser, and that might come into play when we're aligning the chain. Now I'm going to add the torque converter mounting plate. After running a trim plate, I'm a firm believer in that being the way to go. It seems like no matter what, debris, whether it be water, sand, mud, it seems to find its way in past that cover. It's not a real sealed unit by any means. When you have a little gap back here, stuff can get in easier, but maybe it can get out easier too. What I like is that it helps, again, with possible chain clearance issues. When you have a full plate like this, the chain comes around to the sprocket and you're more apt to pick up the edge of the link, and in worst case scenarios, something like a master link. Obviously, if you run your master link on the front side, you'd be contending with the pulley and not the plate, but hey, anything can happen. I just traced it out so it's the same. We're back a couple inches, well, not inches, but you know, centimeters, ½ inch from the, I don't know what you want to call that, reinforcements. We're only taking a little bit off. Whether it's new or not, I always pull the seal and grease my own bearings. And some red number 2 in there. I mounted up my plate, used a little bit of blue Loctite on these 4 bolts. I'm spacing out my pulley for my number 40 420 sprocket. It's the 10 tooth that comes with it, so whatever it is, that's the one. No matter what you do, you seem to run out of threads on the end for your nylock nut. You can get these nuts in a narrower profile. That way you get a more positive fitment on the actual nylock section. I'm going to do a little hack here, and I'm just going to put the nut on backwards. That way all of these threads are beyond the nylock. That'll do. Now I'm going to place this entire thing directly on the mini bike, going right over those slots. These newer risers have threaded inserts, so there's no nuts to worry about. Just 4 bolts. The Stage 2 torque converter kit is so complete that it even comes with a pre-cut chain. I have a gold one that I can put on here, but where this is already the right size and it's guaranteed to fit, send it. That's my style, baby. I have my engine tightened down at the plate. I actually had to remove a little section of this chain, just a link. The only reason I had to do that was because I added these gussets over my foot pegs, and when I come all the way forward, my fan shroud was bottoming out on that steel. I'm about a 1/4 inch in the clear now, so everything else is going to be done at lay tensionaires. These 16mm Coleman torque converter adapters are actually really cool once you get them, you know, slightly hand machined to your liking. I just ran my flapper wheel over the outside of this one and did sort of a hone, and I also used a barrel style grinding wheel, like a sanding barrel, on my Dremel, and I addressed the inside diameter, but only on the side that goes towards the engine. I didn't do the outside. What it was is something right there on the machining of the shaft itself is off, so it gets a little snug, but it pushes on, it can spin, and I can pull it off. That's important. You don't want anything too tight, but you want it snug. Now, I'm in a bit of a hurry to get out of here. Let me show you something. I'm put my washer on that comes with it. Then I'm using two, I think they're 5/8 shims. Yeah, they're a little bit bigger than this shaft. I'll get those on there. And then the adapter goes on. Now I'm going to be leaving out the set screw. What I'm doing is kind of weird. I took a little key. Alright, this is just a plain, 3/16 job that's going to drop down all the way in, and that'll be in the shaft itself. And then I have a short one that's fatter on the sidewall, and that's going to, hold on, that's going to go between the adapter and the shaft. You'll see what I'm saying in a second. They're kind of stepped. You see how one is not as thick as the other, but I'm locked on there now. Alright, next up, this is, I believe, a 1-inch spacer. I use those two shims back there because I don't have any 1-inch shims to bring my alignment out perfect for this back plate part. Again, that's why, see how it's real snug, but I can wiggle it off? That's why I machined that surface. Alright, kick it back, get everything into position. My alignment is absolutely perfect. They're as close as it's going to get. If I go one more shim, I'm going to be impinging too much. Now, I can grab my belt, came with the kit, the rest of the driver, and start looking at the bolt that holds it on. The 1-inch drivers use a round, solid pilot washer. They're not keyed like the 3/4 bores. This kit included a grade 8 bolt. I have a lock washer and another washer that I had that fit on there. Looks like it's made out of some sort of metal-y gasket material. It should bind up. I'm going to throw some blue Loctite on this, and I'm going to try to torque it at 20 foot-pounds. I might have to remove the starter and get a ratchet on my flywheel like I usually do. Oops. My bad. I actually have to put the shims on before the washer, because the shims are about the same outside diameter as the 1-inch spacer is on the inside. So when you start torquing it, it just starts trying to push over the top of them. It's good to know. I didn't like the feel of that torque wrench just about as much as that weird looking washer didn't. It smushed right out. It wouldn't hold any torque whatsoever. I switched to a bigger washer and I started to take it up from 15, 16, 17. When I got to 18, it felt really, really tight. So I lost the leverage and I went manual. I'm guessing I'm around 19 or so. I just don't want to strip this out or break it. I know I've set them at 20 before, but I need this to last through the weekend. Gonna be riding it. I'm gonna bring a 3/4 shaft with me just in case. I can swap it out, but I'm gonna try to run this. Over on the other side of events, I have my throttle hooked up. I used the factory conduit that came with the mini bike. I just switched out the actual cable to something a little bit longer. I cut the conduit short, ran it into that dead end right there, and we got ourselves a full snapper. This linkage is absolutely magnificent. Highly recommend it. This whole kit, really. This is awesome. The kill switch is all set. I have to add a few zip ties. You have a silencer on, pre-filter. I hooked up this neat little mini PCV line. I think we're ready to add some gas and send this puppy down the trail. do. That ride video was captured at the Windber, Pennsylvania Mini Bike Reunion. I was there from Thursday night until Sunday morning. I'd say I rode that trail approximately 30 times, and that air filter came off. I think that was after about the 5th lap on the 2nd day. It rained a couple times, it got a little muddy in that corner, in particular was tricky. On the straightaway, there's some mud to the right. It's on a hill this way. So if you try to go up the center of the trail, your rear end goes out before you even get to that corner. And then where it makes that 180, forget about it. If you go too wide or down the center, the bike will go over. You're fighting it. You can make it around and it's a lot of fun, but you're going to get dirty and things like that can happen. Not a big deal. I kept an official hat, a pair of gloves, and one of them contains a 10mm wrench. The only thing that I changed to this setup was the addition of the set screw that I had left out. And that came per order of the Gray Goat himself. He explained it to me. This is machined specifically for this application. It won't harm the shaft. So it's on there now. This pink residue, I believe that's just some of the blue Loctite. It just, I don't know, flaked off to that rosy color. That 10mm wrench was to periodically check that bolt. I would just hold the drive with one hand and try to turn it with the other. I didn't have any issues. It never loosened up. The other thing that didn't loosen up was my backwards facing nylock nut on the pulley. I'm still running the same belt. It did start to get a little bit wonky where there were wet and muddy conditions. We're given a little bit of heave-ho. Things do tend to start to wear. Not bad though. I mean, considering the amount of time that I put on that, plus all the uphills. Speaking of, the 10-50 ratio with this stockish engine was absolutely perfect. It didn't want to stand up on me and get out of control. It had a nice top speed and it could still do wheelies. The chain loosened up after probably about the 5th time around on, say, like the first day. And then again, probably after the 10th time. Each time I just loosened up the axle and got a little bit on the tensioners. Once that second time happened, it's never gotten any looser than that. I'm not running it too tight, and this thing spins like hot butter. So that's what we're after. The neck bolt had loosened up. I don't know what torque it should be set to, but after I tightened it, I didn't have another issue. Same thing with the handlebars. They got loose on me once, and that's just because, well, I was being a bit of a puss with the wrench, and I wasn't, sending it all the way home. Somebody taught me a trick too, but we'll save that for later on when we actually need it. The brakes, I did make an adjustment at the handlebar. So now that I'm back in my shop or shed, whatever you want to call it, I can just bring this in and I'll make, a new adjustment down here. It's just a 14mm. And then this will be reset. There's still some life in those pads. Other than that, this thing went absolutely flawless. This linkage is amazing. I highly recommend this kit. This is absolutely great. This engine's hopped up a little tiny bit, but even with the stalker, you could have a nice little adventure with it and not really have to worry much. Everything worked out fine. Well, we're being dead nuts honest, pun intended. The nuts on the header, those did come loose, and not loose enough that things were shaking around. Just when I checked it after the engine heated up, there was a little expansion somewhere. I do have a lock washer in that situation for what it's worth, but after I tightened them when it was hot, I didn't have any guff. I don't expect to hear a lot about these kits either, because I'll tell you what, if you have any problems with something this simple, then chances are it was somewhere in your installation process. It could be in the frame itself. Everybody's is a little bit different after all. I don't see any cracks. I did bottom out a few times. Actually, I haven't even looked under here. Look at this. Beautiful. Think anything's living in there? I didn't hold back much. As ugly as those welds might be, nothing's broken. Looks good enough for another run. Somehow that front fender didn't get as dirty. Now, I gotta get my other Coleman squared away. Literally. I love a perfect alignment on my chain and sprockets. Have a good night, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. I want you to stay. I want you to stay. I want you to stay. I want you to stay.